Hello, everyone. Let's go over the keyboard problem. Um, so for this problem, we'll be interacting with three different classes. First, we have the caps lock class. Then we have the button class. And finally, we have the keyboard class. And these will all be interacting with each other. Cool. So let's look at what's going on in this problem. Well, first, at a high level, let's see what each class has. All right, so we have this caps lock class, and that's going to represent the caps lock key, similar to what we have on a computer. And that just tells us if um, we want all the letters that we're typing to be capitalized or not. Then we have a button. So this will represent a button on a keyboard. And looking at the attributes that a button has, first it has a caps lock instance. So this will tell us whether the caps lock key has been pressed. Then it also has a letter, which represents the letter on the button. It has output. Output is a function that we can call that gets called every time we press on a button. And then we also have this variable that keeps track of how many times we press the button. And then there's also this function here. This represents when we press a button, we want to call in this function. And then finally, we have the keyboard. The keyboard is going to keep track of two things. It's going to keep track of what it has typed so far, and then it's also going to keep track of a dictionary of keys, where we're going to map the letter to the actual button object, representing a button for that letter. And then there's also this function called type. We're going to take in a word. The word is going to consist of letters, right? And we're just going to type the letters in the word one by one. Okay, great. So first thing we want to do is we want to implement the button class, which takes in, as we said, a letter, an output function. And it looks like the init method has already been made for us, but what we want to do is we want to just finish calling on this press or implementing this press function, right? And so the first thing we need to do is we need to determine if we want to press a letter that is lowercase or uppercase. And this is going to depend on how many times we have pressed caps lock so far. So as you can see, there's an attribute in caps lock that represents how many times we press the caps lock button. And so since it starts off at 0, that's going to be us assuming that we have not pressed the caps lock button, right? And so when when the pressed attribute of caps lock is 0, we're going to want lowercase. But then when we press it again, that's going to toggle it onto uppercase, and press is now going to be 1. When we press it again, press is going to be 2, and we want it now lowercase. If we press it again after that, press is going to be 3, but we now want uppercase. So as you can see, we kind of have this back and forth behavior, which means that we can probably use modulo here to determine whether we want the character to be uppercase or not. Right, so let's just check. So if self.capslock.press, we can modulo it by 2. And we said that it starts off at 0, and when it's at 0, we want it to be lowercase. Okay, then what we can do is we can call the output on that letter, and we want to return the button that was pressed. Right, so what we want to do is you want to return output of select that letter. Right, and this is because we're told that output is a one argument function, right? So an example of this would be, yeah, this can be a lambda function that takes in a character, and all we do is we just print that character. So that would be an example of an output function, right? Cool. So let's see. So actually we want to return the button that was pressed. So that's going to be self, right? Because we're currently in the button class. But first, let's take care of the else case. And this else case is for self.caps mod 2 is equal to 1 instead, which means that we want to call out the uppercase character. Right, then we can just do the same thing, but we want to call upper on self.letter. Right, and upper is just a function that takes in a character and turns it into uppercase. Right, okay, cool. So when we're done with this, we can just return self, right? Because self is going to represent the button that we're pressing. And this is important because sometimes we might want to chain together these button presses. And so each next call to press is going to rely on the previous call, returning a valid button to press. So that's why we should return self here. Cool, so that's how we can press buttons. And now let's go down to the keyboard. So let's read what the keyboard has. So a keyboard has a dictionary called keys containing a button for each letter in lowercase letters. It also has a list of the letters typed, which may be a mix of uppercase and lowercase letters. Right? Okay, so first we're going to want to start off with this keys here. And what we said is we want to have a key for every lowercase character. And we actually have that saved as a variable here, lowercase letters, which is going to contain every lowercase letter. So what we can do is we can iterate over it. And we're going to use something called a dictionary comprehension. So if you haven't seen this before, this is very similar to how we do list comprehensions, except instead of just having a value that we want to store in the list, we need to provide a key and a value pair. Right, so it looks something like this. We'll say for C in lowercase letters. Right. And so the key we want to use here is the actual character, which is C. And we want to map it to a new button object that contains this character. And we also need to pass in an output function. So what should the output function be in this case? Let's see. So yeah, basically what we want to do is every time we hit on one of these keys, we want typed to basically add that character. And typed is a list, right? And so every time we press on one of these buttons, we want to kind of append that character to the typed list. Right, so we're going to need to pass in a function that allows us to do this. So we can say lambda c, and we can just say self.typed.appends. Right, so every time we press on one of these buttons, we're just going to call append on self.typed, and that's going to give us, that's going to put it into the typed list. Right, and since append is actually a one argument function on its own, we can just directly pass it in like this. No need for us to create a separate lambda. Okay, so now moving on to type, we're given a word and we just want to press the button for each letter in the word. Right, so first we can iterate over the characters in the word. And to get the actual button object associated with the character, remember that keys is a dictionary that maps characters to buttons. So we can do this to get the button object. And then we can just call press on the button. And yeah, since we know that this is going to return us a button, we can just kind of abstract the work of pressing a button to the actual button class, right? Because we know that the button class has a method called press, so we can just rely on that working. Okay, cool. So now we've kind of built this keyboard system that consists of these three different classes. And as you can see, it made it a lot easier when we kind of separated the keyboard and the button class, especially, right? Because when it came time to press a button, we kind of just abstracted that away to however the button class implemented it. Cool, so that's it for this problem.